Hello, everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One on One. My guest for this week's podcast is Tom Llamas, the anchor of NBC Nightly News. Now, TV news sure has changed since a 15-year-old Tom got an internship with a TV station in his home state of Florida. Even then, though, his parents say Tom knew what he wanted to do. When he was 21, Tom interned at NBC News in New York, and now, 25 years later, his career there has come full circle. In June, he became the 8th primary anchor of NBC Nightly News, which you can watch weeknights right after WECT News at 6. And Tom Llamas joins us from 30 Rock in New York. Tom, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Hey, John, so great to be with you, and thank you for those kind words in the introduction.
You've spent 4 months now as the anchor of NBC Nightly News and the managing editor as well. What's it been like with your name on that program?
It's been incredible, John. You know, I work with, I think, the best team in this business, and I get to do two really impactful shows. Nightly News, which, as you know, for me is the gold standard at night for NBC News, on at 6:30 on the East Coast and across this country. Millions of viewers tuning in, you know, hoping to get the news of the day, but also learn something about our country and our world, making sure they're getting the truth like we deliver every single night. And then Top Story, which goes right after our streaming show from 7 to 8 o'clock. So living in both worlds right now, sort of, you know, broadcast, which Nightly News has been there for decades, and then the future streaming, we've been there for about 4 years now with Top Story. We're seeing growth every single month. It's great to do that, and it's good because, you know, Nightly News moves so fast. You have like all the big stories of the day, and then Top Story, we get a little bit more time to sort of park on bigger stories, maybe have what we call crosstalks, interviews, talk to newsmakers, and then explore other stories, right? Stories that appeal to people that maybe are online a little more, maybe stories that are for a younger audience. So it's been great. It's a blessing, John. It feels like I get to play at Yankee Stadium every single night. It's an honor. As you mentioned, I've been doing this since I was 15, so I know the importance of this job and the weight of the responsibility to sit in the chair. And no, I pinch myself every day, and I'm just very humbled by it. And I go into this, you know, with a very sort of simple mentality, and that is I work for the viewer. We work for the viewer. So every decision we do, it is sort of driven on the audience. Will they learn something? Will they be empowered? Will they be inspired by this? If not, then it's not the right story for us.
Was there any feeling of, holy crap, when I got this job? I mean, you're joining legends, Lester Holt, Tom Brokaw, John Chancellor, who had their names on that program, and all of a sudden, there's Tom Llamas.
Yeah, no, all the time. It still happens to this day. I mean, you know, you got to remember, I've been doing this since I was 15. I've been watching these shows as far back as I can remember. So yes, and I personally have known Lester since I was 21. I worked with him as a production assistant. My wife worked with him as a production assistant. So these are people that I've looked up to. I mean, legends in my book, right? So now to have the same job, yeah, I mean, all the time I'm humbled by that. It is wow. It's a wow every single day. But the other part of that is that I'm just so dialed in. I'm so ready to do this. I enjoy doing this. I want to do this. I know I'm ready. And every day I come in excited to tackle the news, you know?
Yep. Where were you when you found out you got the job? How did all that happen?
Well, you know, it's sort of a kind of took place, I think, over a few days to a week because first Lester made his big announcement, which, you know, grabbed a lot of headlines, and my phone started ringing a lot, mostly from my parents, but from friends and family, because everybody was sort of curious. Nobody sort of knew what was next. And it was a big announcement from Lester, and you know, he was going to go to Dateline full time. And so obviously there was an opening here. And, you know, this is something that I've thought about and had hoped for. And like many people at NBC News and in our industry have worked really, really hard over several decades. And so I was hoping I'd be considered, and I'm so glad I was. And then, you know, after that, there's sort of, you know, there was a lunch and there were conversations. And you know how this process plays out. It's not just like you get a call and it's like, hey, you got the job. It's sort of, things are worked out. But yeah, when I first got the job offer officially, it was incredible. And I needed a moment to myself because, you know, John, it's like a long time coming. You know, you work in this business, and the way I have worked is I've worked every shift, overnights, weekends, holidays. You know how it is. I mean, the news doesn't really stop. It is a strange industry in the sense that you don't get holidays or nights. I mean, there's news every part of the day. And when the news is not on, as you know, teams are working. So I've worked every shift in my life. I have gone all over the world for NBC News and other networks, trying to chase stories down. I always tell young kids this, I've worked several 24-hour shifts. I mean,
Yeah.
several 24-hour shifts in my lifetime. So, I mean, I think it was a culmination of all that to get that offer to me. My parents, obviously, I've spoke about this at length, but my parents came to this country as immigrants. So just to know sort of like the arc of that story was pretty incredible. And yeah, I mean, I won't lie. I mean, I needed a minute to myself. I was a little verklempt. And then, but then after that, I of course said yes.
I saw your mom and dad with you on the third hour of Today last week. Your mom says you were in high school when you knew what you wanted to do and you worked toward it. So where did that want come from? It doesn't just, you're not born with it, although I think we're given gifts by the good Lord to do what we end up doing. But where did that want come from?
Yeah, look, I think when I look back, I think that growing up in that household where my parents, were Cuban refugees, we watched a lot of news, and we watched news in English and Spanish. And so current events were always talked about at my house. My parents loved the newspaper. They read it cover to cover. They would talk about columnists. They would talk about coverage. If there was a big Fidel Castro interview, we'd watch it as a family, and then my parents would, share their thoughts about it, and I would listen. And in our house, this was like with uncles and grandparents, and constantly talking about world events and elections and what was happening. So to me, growing up, to sort of become an informed citizen, it started very young for me. And my parents have always instilled that in me, that you had to know what was going on. You had to know who was running for office. You had to know history, because I think since they lost their country, they wanted to make sure that me and my brother were always informed. And it wasn't like, there was homework at night, but it was just something they grew up with because they knew how important it was. They took none of that for granted. They didn't take free information, the free press, for granted, because they knew it was sort of integral to having a democracy. Because they saw it firsthand, they lived it. So I think that's the background, right? And then I think I enjoyed writing. It was probably one of my favorite classes. In freshman year, I'm taking this writing class, and an alumnus comes in. His name is Louis Aguirre. Great guy. He's still a local news anchor and reporter in Miami. And a friend now, because he's been such a great person to me. He came in and he was working already, and he said, listen, if you like writing, you should think about TV news. And, I didn't even know that was a career. You know of TV anchors and reporters, but you don't really think of that as a career. And then I talked to my parents about it, and they said, yeah, go for it. And then I got an internship when I was 15. And, Louis kind of, when he came to our class, he kind of gave us like a little playbook. He's like, if you want to do this, here's the things I would do. And it was like, get an internship, get on the speech and debate team, stick to, writing classes and speech and drama classes to learn how to speak in public. And then, keep reading the paper. And those were all kind of things I was interested in. And so I just sort of doubled down on that. And I've been doing it ever since. I worked my first job when I was 15 at Telemundo, and I've been in newsrooms ever since.
That's something that I got my first job in radio when I was 15, and I was blessed to know what I wanted to do from a young age too. But you were an intern. You were 15. What did you take away from that? Okay, yep, I know it. I thought I knew it, but now I do know it. What did you take away from that time at Telemundo?
Interns, and when you're an intern, you may remember this, John, you have good days and you have bad days. There are days where you sit and you do nothing all day and you just look at the clock and you're like, wow, like, why am I here? But then there are the days where I was out at news conferences and I was helping the photographer, and I was, either helping with the tripod or asking questions, to somebody, or interviewing somebody. And then, you watch the news and you can kind of see yourself in the reflection of a glass, even though you were cut out of the piece. If you kind of look around the four corners, you're like, oh, wow, that's me. So at 15, little by little, I was doing that, but I was doing everything. I was serving Cuban coffee. I was answering phones on the assignment desk. I was rolling teleprompter. I was listening. I was just riding along with reporters and photographers, just listening to these people that I looked up to talk, and how they navigated stories in the beat, how they talked to the assignment desk. I mean, back then, you'll remember this, John, every crew car had, it was like, I guess it was like a CB radio, but you talked directly to the assignment desk. You would say things like QSL if you understood what the desk was saying, and they would ask, like, I think every team had a number, and they would, or the last name, and they would call and you'd answer. And I mean, little things like that were just so cool to me as a kid. And so, getting to talk on that radio, answering the call, I mean, it was all just so fun. So even though I was 15 and I was very young, it was incredible to get a front row seat to everything that was happening during the day.
Yeah, and you had the blessing of doing it right where you grew up. My first job in TV as a part-timer was in the market where I grew up. So going back to my high
It's great.
school, covering that, talking to people who were friends with my parents, that was the neat thing about starting right where I grew up, and I'll take those memories away forever.
Yeah, and you also realize the importance of local news. I always tell people one of the best jobs I've ever had to this day was being a local reporter in Miami for NBC6 WTVJ. And it was just so great because I knew the community. I cared so much about that community. I came from that community, so I had the context of stories, and I could help out, the news gathering because I knew the area so well. And it's so interesting because local news plays such an important role in the lives of people day to day, more than they know. And
Yeah.
then I look at the greater sort of media landscape, and if you watch any great documentary that is out now, a majority of the footage is coming from local news
Yeah.
that has gone out there. They grabbed that event when it happened, they archived it, and now they're sharing it with these filmmakers. And local news, I always say, is our central nervous system, right? If local news doesn't twitch, we up at the network sometimes, we don't know exactly what's happening in those smaller communities. So it's great to have those relationships with our local newsrooms because you're our eyes and ears a lot of times in these markets.
We had a story here in Wilmington that, if I'm not mistaken, led your nightly news a couple of weeks ago, and we had an explosion at a building here.
Oh, yeah, I
And
remember
we,
that.
We had a guy who was just standing there because he heard the gas leaking,
Right.
and was actually shooting the video when the building blew. And that ended up
That was a wild explosion.
everybody in our newsroom looked up and said, "Hey, we're the lead story on nightly news." And but you're right. How many different affiliates you talk to every day to get that material that's often on your newscast?
But John, you also, you sort of highlight something you don't see a lot if you don't work in a newsroom, which is that moment when everyone's in the newsroom watching a story and, watching and learning and giving feedback and talking about it. And it's like those were great moments. So I got that from 15 on, and when someone got that big exclusive and the entire newsroom was watching, it was just like it was great. I mean, and so sort of growing up with that, seeing that, it was just it was so impressionable to me, if you will, that I was like, wow, I want to do this forever.
You went to Loyola University, then you came back to New York, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were an intern in 30 Rock before you got your first full-time job, right?
I was. The summer before I graduated from Loyola, I interned here, and it was a great internship. I worked for a division called NBC News Specials, and they're the ones that handle the breaking news and then the large news events that are planned, say a convention. At that time, they would also handle if there was going to be a war. There was no war during this time in 2000 when I was there, but there was the Republican and the Democratic National Convention. And so we were covering that. We were working on coverage of that because that takes a lot of effort. And obviously, there's sort of wall-to-wall coverage. There was in 2000. And it was a great internship. And I fell in love with New York City. And I wanted to come back. And so when I graduated, I was rewarded with an overnight weekend job for MSNBC, getting paid not a lot of money and no health insurance, but I worked my tail off and I took the job, and it was very, very hard at first. And I always tell people, the first few years in this business are very, very hard, and it's a great business. And I read an amazing line from someone who said it's a great business. It's a business that doesn't always love you back, and it's true. And those early years were definitely like a little bit hard, but those are formative years. And if you can sort of get over that hump, it gets better. And that's what I try to tell people.
Are you a better network anchor and correspondent because you had those years in local news and TVJ in Miami?
Yeah, I always tell people I think it's a strength I have that I've done sort of almost every job in this business. And when I say almost every job, I mean, I've worked with graphic artists as a graphics PA that I was working with them, for months at a time. So I knew how they put together graphics, how they design graphics, how long it takes. I used to cut tape. I've shot. I've edited. I've produced. I've booked. I mean, I know all those jobs. And so, having that background, I know what it takes. I know that it's a team sport. And I know that you cannot do it by yourself. And I don't care how great of an anchor you are. I don't care if you think you have all the gifts from God to do this job. You need a great team because it takes a lot of people. And then you have the people out in the field. And having worked so long as a correspondent and a reporter, I mean, I know what it takes to go out there and to wait and to try to get the elements and then try to be under deadline and get that great script back and get that great moment in the interview. It's a lot, but I have an appreciation for that. And I think that is the best training I have. And I tell people a lot of time when they talk about, where they want to go after college and grad school. I mean, there's so many different ways nowadays in this business, but it's great just to get in the door and start working because that work experience will stay with you forever.
A lot of people ask me, what's your schedule like? When do you go in? When do you get home? What is your schedule like? I'm going to put it to a network anchor. What's your schedule like during the day?
It's a lot. It's a lot, John. And like today's like a pretty busy day. I'm going to do this great podcast with you. Right after this, I'm going to go meet with the representatives of another country for an interview that we are trying to lock in. And it's the United Nations week, so we'll be having that meeting offsite at 30 Rock to meet with their diplomats. After that, I'm preparing for another big interview with a head of state. We hope will happen tomorrow, and we're working on that right now. That'll be a very intense sort of 2 to 3 hour session where we're working with our producers and our researchers and putting together that interview. I'm talking to my producers every minute about nightly news and top story. And my day is booked. I don't have a minute from now until, and I'm not even joking, from the time I get off the air with you, my calendar is booked up until I'm live on Nightly News. There is something at every minute that's been planned. So it's a busy day today. Yesterday, and then sometimes you have a busy day and then you have breaking news. 2 days ago, we had this horrible. We had the Ryan Ruth verdict. And that was a special report by itself, but then the guy ended up stabbing himself. So that turned into a longer news event because we didn't see that happening. And then yesterday you had the breaking news with this horrific the sniper attack on the ICE agents. And so it's been a busy news cycle. I mean, usually the summers are sort of slow, but we've had a ton of breaking news, and it's been a busy news fall now as we starting to fall. But to answer your question, I'm pretty much, my entire day is booked. I get in around noon here, and I'm here till 8 o'clock. But every hour of that day is pretty much in a meeting or talking about the show or doing something. There's not a lot of free time.
You did mention someone earlier, but is there one person or a couple of people as you were working your way along that gave you that piece of advice that just stood with you and has helped get you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of people. I had a good I had a good friend who was a longtime reporter in Miami. His name was Hank Tester. And he had actually owned TV stations. He was a local reporter and anchor. And then he had gotten to Miami. He had covered a lot of hurricanes in Miami. So he had a wealth of knowledge. To this day, he's a good friend. And he had so much experience. And I was a very green reporter when I was in Miami, when I was just starting my on-air career. And he always had like good sayings for me, good tips, good advice. And he also, I think more than advice, you never forget the people that sort of believed in you, right? Because everyone is sort of growing. I'm a firm believer that if you're not growing, you're dying. So to this day, I still have editors. I still have people that I ask their opinion because I'm still learning, right? I'm far from perfect. And
we all are.
I hope I haven't hit my peak either. I hope I'm still going. Jose Diaz-Balart is a good friend and mentor, and he's always been there for me. And I always tell people in our business, in any business, that you should always identify people that have been through what you've been through and are at a different level. And that way they can help guide you because everyone has sort of had the same issues at some point in their career. So it's always good to bounce something off someone. Yvette Miley is someone who runs our NBCU Academy here in New York now, but she was my news director down in Miami, and she's always been a mentor and a friend and someone who supported me early on. And I rely on her a lot as well. So there have been a lot of people throughout my career that have helped me. In fact, when I got this job, when I was officially announced and I could actually tell people, I called a lot of them. I called probably 20 to 30 people who have helped me throughout my career from every stop I made. I mean, even from when I was an overnight PA to the internship, people who gave me a chance to say thank you because it can be a tough job and it can be grueling.
Who have you not interviewed yet that you want to, or that you'd like to get the opportunity to?
Look, I think anybody in the tech sector is fascinating. I would love to interview Jeff Bezos for a variety of reasons. Elon Musk, I think these are people that are very, very fascinating, that are changing the world in a lot of ways and are seeing things that a lot of regular Americans aren't seeing day to day because of what they're doing with technology and AI. So I think those are big interviews. We're always working towards an interview with President Trump, and I'm hopeful that'll happen in the future. I think anybody who's a newsmaker right now, I saw a story about and I don't like to tip my hand too much, right? I don't want to show my cards, but I had seen a story about someone in the entertainment industry the other day, and it really touched me, and so I reached out because I'd like to interview that person as well. So we're always trying. I mean, in this job, you know, you're covering the news day to day, you're planning for big news events, but you're also trying to get those big bookings for the interviews that you think viewers are going to really want to hear from. And so that's something it's meetings and conversations we do every single week.
Where is news going in the next 10 to 15 years, Tom? It's come so far in the last 10 to 15 years with streaming and everything else. Where do you see it going in the next 10 to 15?
I think it sticks around. I don't think we can operate as a country or a world without the information. And AI is not going to do that for us. AI can share the information, AI can aggregate the information, but you still need reporters and photographers and editors who are going to the story. They're originating the reporting, because AI doesn't originate the reporting. ChatGPT is not going to the wildfire. We're going to the wildfire. And we have teams that know how to do this, and they've been doing this for decades. So I don't think we're going everywhere. I think to survive, you have to sort of look at what NBC News is doing, and you have to kind of be everywhere. You have to do things like this podcast. You have to make sure you have a very aggressive and productive digital operation. Your digital teams, your websites, make sure that they are their own entities, right? You work all together, but that they are driving reporting too. They're out making calls. And NBC News sort of invested in that 5 to 10 years ago. They made NBCNews.com its own thing instead of just being a mirror of what you saw on the Today Show or Nightly News. And it's paid off. Our site beats CNN.com and NewYorkTimes.com on big stories. Sometimes our political unit is consistently breaking stories. So that was a smart investment. I think you have to be in streaming, which we did as well. We planted our flag early on, and we stayed. We doubled down when others were getting out of streaming. Early on, we stayed, and it was the smart play. We're seeing growth every single month. So, John, it's you know, the reality is we're asked to do more with less. That is just the reality of the business, because media has been fractured and because of technology. But I think you have to be everywhere, and I think that people will always depend on us. I do think that your journalism has to be sort of scoop driven. I think you have to not just cover the news, you have to uncover news. So you have to make sure you're sort of playing all those games as well.
I saw a really cool interview that you did with Jimmy Fallon, and he let everybody know you're a vinyl records guy.
Yeah.
What's your most prized possession in that vinyl records room you have in your house?
You know, that's that's a subjective question, right? It's tough because there are records that mean a lot to me because of how I found them, right? Like I was maybe out on assignment somewhere in the world and I had a few hours and I stumbled into an overseas record store and I found like, wow, this incredible record that I probably would not have found in the United States. And so that record means a lot to me. There are places where, you know, you found a very rare record. I'm thinking of this Bo Diddley record I have that I think they only made like maybe a few hundred copies of that exist, you know, on the planet. And I found one at a record store. And it's a great record. But I mean, and then there's records that people give you that are gifts. You know, like I still have like the first record I got, which was it was Van Morrison live in concert, and my wife gave it to me. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite albums because it's a beautiful record. I mean, just great music is on that record. So yeah, I don't have a favorite. It's like my kids. I don't have a favorite kid. I love them all.
Yeah, I've got a bunch. I just gave a lot away because I found a DJ in town who actually uses vinyl records when he plays.
That's great.
Yeah, so I gave him a lot of the stuff that I had back in college, and I kept a couple, though, that I really wanted to save, some autographed ones. Eddie Money autographed a record for me.
Wow.
Back in college when he played at my college, and I kept that one. I kept some Journey records that I have autographed as well. But I thought that was cool that you have an entire room in your house just for vinyl. And it seems like, if I'm right, depending on the mood you're in, that's the record you'll put on, right?
Oh, yeah, analog. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I love jazz, too, but jazz I feel you could only sort of listen to at night. That's just me. I mean, I know people like jazz all day. I'm someone who I can only listen to jazz at night. But yeah, and different moods. I do research in that room. I hang out with the kids and our family in that room. I hang out with friends in that room. But it's funny you mention about the autographed records, because the other cool thing about records is that you got to remember, I know you know this, John, but before the internet, people just played the record and they held the record and they just looked at this thing, right?
Yeah.
They looked at everything, right? The album jacket and what was inside, the linear notes. And it's funny because I'll buy records and people have written messages inside. write either their name or they'll write a note or they'll highlight the song they loved. And it's just kind of cool to kind of discover those things, right? Because back then, that's all people had. You listen to the music and you looked at that album cover and you're like, you just sort of drifted away. It was cool.
I think it also, those records take you back to a moment in your own life. And then memories start flooding back around that moment, at least for me anyway. A record that I would played in college, or my Ted Nugent Free for All, which was my very first record. That and Jeff Beck Wired were the first two albums I ever had. And so you put those on and it takes you immediately back to 76 and 77. When Tom wants to blow off and Tom wants to unplug, what does he do?
Yeah. I'm in that record room. I'm hanging out. Me and my family. Since my week is sort of jam packed, my weekends are with my family and my kids. So love doing sports with them. Love going to their events, whether it's a play or a jiu-jitsu match or a baseball game. Like I love doing all that. And that's how those are my weekends. I mean, we love doing stuff with the kids. Love watching college football. Love watching baseball. We're big Yankees fans. Definitely can sort of relax at a Yankees game with my son and my wife. And then just doing anything, hanging out like anybody else. Like I'm binge watching the Dallas Cowboys documentary on Netflix right now about Jerry Jones. Which
that's a great documentary.
So good, yeah. And I watched the Charlie Sheen one last week, which was
we watched that one too.
Really great. Yeah, it was wild. But I just like anybody else. That's what I like to do.
I married a saint. My wife.
Oh yeah, who dat?
My wife Sheila is the main reason that what I consider to be a successful career, and that our kids are as successful as they are. Tell me about your wife, Jennifer. How important is she? What has she meant to you in your career and your family life?
Yeah, she's the best. I mean, I couldn't do any of this without her. She's my best friend. I love her. We've been together since my senior year of college, and we met in New Orleans. We got married in New Orleans. She also worked in the business. She rose to the position of executive producer. So she's very well versed in our industry, which is incredibly helpful because she knows the demands. And when I have to get up and leave, we could be at a family event and I have to get up and leave and jump on a plane. She understands why that has to happen. So that has been incredibly helpful. She is a huge supporter of mine. So she watches and she gives me feedback, which is great. She's an incredible mother and she is so great. And she's a super mom. We have 3 kids and she does everything. And she really is incredible. I can't say enough about her. And we like the same things. We like to travel. We like to have a good time. We go to New Orleans. We're actually have a trip planned in a couple weeks. We're going to see a Saints game. Her dad is a diehard Saints fan. He's actually never missed a Saints game in the Superdome except one game. It was because one of Jen's sisters was being born. But he's never missed a game in the Dome, which is crazy. So yeah, we're big Who Dat fans too.
Yeah, there has to be that rock at home. And Sheila and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary 2 weeks ago. And if you don't have that at home, you're not going to be a success where you work.
I agree. The family unit is important. We're going to celebrate 20 years in June of next year.
Yeah, well, congratulations. I know she's important to you. Tom Llamas is the anchor of NBC Nightly News weeknights right after WECT News at 6. Tom, congratulations. I know you have done an awful lot.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
An awful lot in this business. I appreciate you taking the time to join us for the One-on-One with John Evans podcast and letting our viewers and listeners learn a little bit more about you. Thanks.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Tom Llamas for taking time from his busy schedule to join us for this week's podcast interview. You can watch Tom weeknights right after WECT News at 6 on NBC Nightly News. And don't forget, Top Story with Tom Llamas goes at 7 o'clock weeknights on NBCnews.com. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please follow or subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you want to see a video version of this podcast, just go to my John Evans TV channel on YouTube. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.